Okay, thank you. We move on now to item 15, Intangible Cultural Heritage in Emergencies. Mr. Tinkatis, the floor is yours to present this item to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and before entering into the document, I'd like to start the presentation of the item by putting it in the broader context of the global framework of culture in emergencies. As some of you will know well, the General Conference of UNESCO adopted the strategy for reinforcing UNESCO's action for the protection of culture and the promotion of cultural pluralism in the event of armed conflict at its 38th session in 2015, and followed by the action plan which was approved by the UNESCO Executive Board in May 2017. The General Conference this year, at its 39th session, adopted an addendum to the strategy concerning emergencies associated with disasters caused by natural and human-induced hazards, and made an appeal on protecting culture and promoting cultural pluralism, the key to lasting peace. Moreover, the General Conference also adopted a new cross-cutting expected result in the 39C5 entitled Culture Protected and Cultural Pluralism Promoted in Emergencies through Better Preparedness and Response, in particular through the effective implementations of UNESCO's cultural standard-setting instruments. Hence, we now have at UNESCO a comprehensive framework for culture in emergency contexts of both conflict and natural disasters. Concerning the 2003 Convention, you will recall that the operational directives were amended by the 6th GA to include a specific chapter on ICH and sustainable development, which includes a dedicated section on peace, as well as on community-based resilience to natural disaster and climate change. And it is perhaps worth recalling the recognition made by the UN Security Council following a number of resolutions culminating with the adoption of Resolution 2347 on the destruction of cultural heritage in the event of armed conflict. This historic resolution is the first UN Security Council resolution to focus exclusively on cultural heritage. It includes specific references to UNESCO's strategy and UNESCO's role. Safeguarding culture in emergencies also contributes to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, notably by strengthening resilience in relation to SDGs 11, 13, 14, and 15 in particular, and by promoting peaceful and inclusive societies in SDG 16. Now, coming back to the specific work of the 2003 Convention on this issue. As you all remember, last year the committee initiated its reflection on intangible cultural heritage in emergencies and felt that more case studies were necessary to fully grasp the complexity of the issue in view of defining operational modalities for the implementation of the Convention in such situations. The Secretariat therefore conducted a number of activities in relation to different contexts: conflict, displacement, and natural disaster. Their results are presented to the committee in the working document, including lessons learnt and possible ways forward. As regards conflicts, a small-scale survey was carried out on the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage of Syrian refugees, mainly in Lebanon and Jordan, as well as some others in Egypt, France, Germany, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Turkey. The objective of this first activity was to understand more about the dual role of intangible cultural heritage and communities in a displacement context. Based on this experience, the results of this survey being promising, we thought it would be interesting to pilot a fully fledged needs identification. So we tested this approach in the province of North Kivu in Democratic Republic of Congo, together with the UNESCO office in Kinshasa. This activity had a twofold objective. First, to assess the needs in view of defining context-based safeguarding actions for the intangible cultural heritage in North Kivu in the framework of the 2003 Convention. And second, to feed the reflection of the committee with a case study in the context of a long-standing conflict and large-scale internal displacement of populations. Concerning natural disasters, because of the unpredictability of such emergency and because there is some research and literature available in the field, we felt that it was more appropriate as a first step to conduct a desk study in order to identify and conceptualize the key issues at stake. We therefore commissioned a desk study on the safeguarding and mobilization of intangible cultural heritage in context of natural and human-induced hazards, backed up with case studies. Finally, the Secretariat continued to provide dedicated support for the preparation and implementation of emergency international assistance requests. I will not enter into the details of the results of these activities, which you can find in the document, as well as in consulting the full reports which are available on the website. I would rather like to take here the opportunity to highlight a few key points which emerged. Firstly, the results of the activities confirmed, as was acknowledged last year by the committee, that intangible cultural heritage is indeed at risk in situations of emergencies, and secondly, at the same time, it can play a fundamental role towards preparedness, recovery, and resilience of communities. Another striking point is that the broad and full concept of intangible cultural heritage is not duly taken into account in situations of emergency. For example, humanitarian agencies look at some aspect of culture in terms of cultural norms and behavior. In the field of disaster risk management, local indigenous knowledge is more and more considered, but the broader concept of ICH, which encompasses practice and transmission-related issues, is not addressed. That is precisely where the 2003 Convention has its added value. There is most probably a lack of knowledge and understanding of the full concept by humanitarian and peace-building actors, as well as by the disaster risk management world. The studies mentioned in this document also clearly illustrate that communities do take action to enact their living heritage to the extent possible, but that support by the national authorities is needed by guaranteeing an enabling environment, or at the very least, not undermining communities' ability to practice their ICH. In terms of operational modalities, one lesson that can already be drawn at this stage is the usefulness of community needs-based needs identifications, and please allow me to explain what we mean here. This entails background studies, stakeholder consultations, field surveys, and a careful analysis of the results collected. So this approach requires an important preparatory phase, expertise and confidence building with those affected by crisis and disasters. And I say, therefore, that this is not about a 2-week mission from an international expert, but it requires at least 3 to 6 months to be done properly, depending on the context, of course. This approach is therefore in line with the principles of the Convention by giving a real voice to the communities and by recognizing the primary role of communities to define their intangible cultural heritage within a specific context. It is key for developing context-specific safeguarding actions that respond to the concrete needs on the ground. The Secretariat is of the view that community-based needs identifications may be considered by the Committee as one of the first ports of call when designing primary interventions to respond to emergency situations in the framework of the 2003 Convention. Hence, we would like to further roll out this approach in different contexts of emergencies, both conflict and natural disasters. Mr. Chair, I wish now to provide some feedback to the committee members on the lessons that we can draw so far from the mechanisms of the Convention dedicated to emergency, namely the emergency international assistance. Although a low number of requests for emergency international assistance have been submitted so far, it seems to be a useful mechanism for acting in emergencies while responding to the requirement for community involvement under the 2003 Convention. Of course, one needs to recognize that this is not set up as a rapid response mechanism deployable at short notice. But the UNESCO Heritage Emergency Fund provides a good complementary possibility to this end. It should be underlined that technical assistance was required or deemed necessary in all cases and was very helpful to finalize requests. Indeed, by involving the joint collaboration of the submitting state, an expert, and the Secretariat, it proved to be an effective mechanism to supporting the submitting state to define a specific response to the emergency context in line with the Convention's provisions, as well as to share experiences of similar situations. And a recent good example is the technical assistance provided to Niger by a Malian expert. Content-wise, what we can draw from this experience so far is that a phase-to-phase approach is needed. One should avoid starting with large-scale projects and rather start with the approach of community-based needs identification in order to design appropriate actions in the second phase. Dear members of the committee, on the basis of the knowledge and experience gained since the last session of the committee, the Secretariat would like to propose several possible ways forward. Firstly, we feel that there is a need to continue developing more case studies which results might point to emerging patterns in order to develop suitable interventions. Secondly, as already explained, it would be interesting to continue piloting community needs-based identifications on the ground after an emergency occurs. Another proposal is to make improved use of the mechanisms and processes of the Convention, in particular in the framework of inventories in the field of preparedness and periodic reporting. Finally, it seems important to foster the use of emergency international assistance in a strategic manner with a view of generating a wealth of knowledge and experience on how to deal with intangible cultural heritage in situations of emergency. Before concluding, allow me, Mr. Chair, a brief general comment. As we move forward on this issue, we must measure the level of sensitivity it implies. Dealing with intangible cultural heritage is dealing with people. It touches upon identity and cultural rights issues, among others. We need to be careful when we talk about generic measures. Each case is different. In some cases, it will certainly seem not appropriate to move and intervene, for instance, until other basic human needs, food, shelter, sanitation, are properly met. Moreover, the agreement and consent of concerned stakeholders is an absolute necessity going on with operational action on the ground in the field of ICH. Hence, caution should be applied and intense preparatory work carried out before engaging intervention in this field in a specific emergency context. And of course, access to the right people is necessary. To conclude, intervention in the field of intangible cultural heritage in emergencies are more likely to happen in the preparedness or recovery phases of the emergency. The draft decision has been elaborated in this sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your kind and very long, detailed presentation and the introduction of the draft decision regarding intangible cultural heritage in emergencies. I now open the floor. Does anybody wish to take the floor? Lebanon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. En écoutant Monsieur Curtis, je me suis posé la question de savoir de quelle communauté parle-t-on. Parce que les études sur le terrain ont montré combien les communautés étaient désarticulées. Évidemment, si nous parlons des camps de réfugiés, je veux bien. Mais de ceux qui vivent dans les quartiers urbains ou qui sont dispersés dans les campagnes, etc., je ne vois pas du tout où trouver les communautés. On parle plutôt de ménages atomisés qui sont loin de leur lieu de ressourcement culturel. Donc, je pense qu'il y a à retravailler ce concept de communauté tel qu'on le trouve dans la Convention. Merci.
Thank you, Lebanon. Austria, Philippines, Turkey first. Austria first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've read document 15 with great interest. The overview of key findings provides an insightful overview and reasons why, under the given circumstances and its various contexts, the debate on the role of ICH in emergencies such as armed conflicts and disasters caused by natural and human hazards appears essential for guiding the future work of the Convention, also with a view to achieving the goals of the 2030 Agenda. Now, with regard to disasters caused by natural hazards and the effect of climate change, we can speak from our own experience that the Convention is of seminal importance for the safeguarding of, as well the harnessing of local and traditional knowledge, also in the context of a growingly technologized nation state. Because up until today, natural hazards such as avalanches cannot be perfectly predicted or fully assessed by scientific means. And for this reason, the transmission and safeguarding of traditional knowledge and practices is all the more important. Inventorying, in our case, has provided to be a valuable mechanism in this matter, and we would also welcome more examples of good practices regarding cooperations with educational institutions. We also agree that more case studies are needed in order to identify the needs of communities, but also to raise awareness about the importance of ICH in interventions by humanitarian actors. In this regard, we would like to ask the Secretariat if additional activities are planned that aim at raising awareness of the importance of ICH in the work of humanitarian organizations. And we further noted the emphasis put on community-based needs identification as a preliminary basis when defining safeguarding measures. And in this regard, we wish to draw attention also to our ethical principles for safeguarding ICH, especially in those cases when research and data collection is carried out by non-community members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Austria. After hearing Philippines and Turkey, I will invite the Secretariat to respond to questions. Now I give the floor to Philippines.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. This is a very interesting and timely subject, given global challenges of increasing armed conflicts, climate change, and natural disasters. We thank Mr. Curtis very much for his presentation. Intangible cultural heritage is endangered by these threats, but at the same time, ICH can also be a source of community-driven disaster risk reduction, resilience, and recovery, as rightfully mentioned in the document and by Mr. Curtis. There is a wealth of potential in this field, and we welcome the Secretariat's initial desk study. We also welcome, of course, the focus on community-driven responses. Just to share, in the Philippines, we're on the front lines of climate change and extreme weather events. In 2013, we were hit by the strongest typhoon ever in world history, and 6,000 people unfortunately lost their lives in the central Philippines, and with that also their cultural heritage. So after that terrible event, communities affected did use the arts and cultural heritage to help in the healing and recovery process. And also, similarly, recently in the Philippines, we experienced a difficult armed conflict in the southern Philippines, in the city of Marawi, which is also affecting communities and their intangible cultural heritage. Thus, we feel very strongly about this item, and we'd like to see it further developed. We therefore recommend institutional linkages between UNESCO and related UN agencies, such as the UN High Commission for Refugees, the UN Office of the Coordinator for Humanitarian Affairs, and the Red Cross be explored perhaps through a workshop, bring together these various actors and of course the communities affected themselves to explore synergies and cooperation. Lastly, we also think that climate change should be a priority. So intangible cultural heritage for climate change adaptation and mitigation is a very interesting topic for the future. Funding mechanisms such as the Green Climate Fund therefore might be tapped in this regard. We have an amendment to the draft decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippines. Now Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me thank the Secretariat for the detailed report before us. It shows that the Secretariat has been working for integrating the intangible cultural heritage in emergency situations with a comprehensive approach since the 11th session of the committee meeting in Addis Ababa. Though the item was discussed for the first time only last year, since then a number of activities have been carried out by the Secretariat to cover emergency from several fronts, ranging from situations of conflict and violent extremism to emergencies associated with disasters challenges caused by natural and human-induced hazard. We believe that this comprehensive approach of ICH is exemplary for UNESCO when responding to emergencies. In fact, we have been addressing this issue in Turkey since 2013, specifically in relation to Syrians living in Turkey. In Turkey, the number of Syrian guests has exceeded 3 million as of 2017. Majority of these people have already moved from camps and settled in various cities of Turkey, especially in cities near the Syrian border. In the past 7 years, formal and non-formal education has been provided to the children, including the ones born in Turkey, in their native language, so that they can learn their own culture. Our NETCOM, Turkish National Commission for UNESCO, has made several field visits to these camps to meet with all relevant stakeholders. There were a number of recommendations that came out of these field visits and subsequent meetings, and they have been integrated into the work of our relevant institutions. We believe that these important experiences could be reflected in the future work of UNESCO and could contribute to the efforts to this end. And we will provide written information with regard to our experience to the Secretariat. As a result of these studies regarding the emergencies in relation to displaced persons, we have learned that we must focus on promoting enabling spaces and means that they may encourage these people to sustain their identity and belonging, to be able to educate themselves in their own language and to integrate to the society they live in. This is just the beginning of a process in UNESCO on emergency issues in the context of 2003 Convention. Further work is needed to further utilization of the international assistance mechanism for the integration of intangible cultural heritage into the humanitarian agenda, for the integration of intangible cultural heritage to prevent violent extremism. Considering our experience in this field, we are ready to support the work of UNESCO, especially with regard to emergencies associated with displaced people. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Turkey. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Secretary to respond to some questions raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee members who took the floor for their positive and encouraging remarks on the work we have been doing, which we realize is far from complete, but we appreciate the indication we seem to be getting that we're going in a positive direction. Concerning the question from the delegate of Lebanon, yes, I can only say yes, there is a need to define communities in these contexts. It's a very complex issue. The convention itself does not define communities because even we see within the nomination files submitted for various mechanisms, the listings, we have multiple approaches to defining communities. And clearly, in the case, as you mentioned, where communities are dispersed, then it becomes even more problematic. So I can only say I agree with those observations. Exactly how to approach it, let's say from a perspective of policy, is something that may not be as simple as one case. And so I would invite us to reflect further on that and to keep that discussion going, but to acknowledge indeed that the way to define a community in a situation of an emergency may not be the same as when there is no emergency and the community may need some different way of being defined and approached. I can only say I concur that it's a very valid point. Concerning about raising awareness among humanitarian actors, the question from the Philippines, UNESCO has recently signed an agreement with the Red Cross. And indeed, we would be keen to sign with other UN agencies. The idea of a workshop may be interesting to do, and so there's, you know, it's a good idea. So we can look into that in our work going forward. Of course, for the comments from Turkey, we appreciate and welcome very much feedback, information, research, collaboration with the NATCOM, which seems to intersect on situations of displacement, the issues of ICH in formal and non-formal education, as well as education for the prevention of violent extremism. So any help we get, we welcome very much. Thank you. I think.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Now I give the floor to Ambassador of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be very brief and very quick. First of all, I would like also to join my colleagues who thanks the Secretariat for the efforts done in this domain, and we recognize that it is very difficult, but nevertheless, the work done so far is very positive, and we think that they are on the right track. Nevertheless, I have just two comments actually about the UN agencies. When it comes to the cooperation with other UN agencies, it would be appreciable for us as delegation of Palestine to keep in mind also that the cooperation with the UNRWA agency could be interesting. This is the first thing. Second thing, I have a precise question to the Secretariat. We learned that UNESCO has sent several missions in different areas of armed conflict. One of the missions took place in January 2017 in Aleppo, and there was a report about the destructions in the cultural and natural heritage domain, and also regarding education. So my question is, could it be possible for the Convention 2003 also to join such mission to report also about the effects on the intangible cultural heritage in these situations? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Palestine. Maintenant, j'aimerais inviter au délégué de Sénégal à prendre la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On félicite, comme les autres, le secrétariat pour ce document très important. C'est une question délicate qui interpelle l'ensemble du système des Nations Unies. Et c'est vrai que l'UNESCO, à travers ses instances, a déjà pris beaucoup de déclarations. On a même souvent pensé que les conflits ou les catastrophes naturelles impactaient beaucoup plus sur le matériel, sur les bâtiments, sur les villes, sur les forêts, mais l'impact sur le patrimoine culturel immatériel est beaucoup plus important. Si nous pensons, en tout cas, nous prenons le cas de l'Afrique, parce que là, derrière chaque élément matériel se cache un immatériel extrêmement important qui est en Afrique et donne même la signification au matériel. Donc, quand on détruit une forêt, quand on détruit un village, c'est tout un ensemble d'éléments immatériels, valeurs immatérielles qu'on détruit. Et je pense que c'est pourquoi, pour l'Afrique, le patrimoine culturel immatériel est beaucoup plus délicat dans sa sauvegarde par rapport aux conflits et par rapport aux catastrophes naturelles. Je prends le cas du Sénégal. Il y a quelques années, on a eu une crise assez importante au sud du pays, en Casamance, une crise d'indépendantisme, si vous voulez. Et il y a, pour rapprocher, si vous voulez, l'État et les protagonistes, on a utilisé l'expression de la culture, parce que simplement c'était un conflit fondamentalement culturel et politique, bien sûr. Et l'expression de la parenté à plaisanterie, qui est un phénomène, une expression culturelle qui est dans toute l'Afrique de l'Ouest, qui a déjà même été classée pour le Niger sur la liste représentative, on l'a utilisé pour permettre aux CRR, qui étaient cousins des Diola de la Casamance, pour faciliter les relations, pour faciliter les rapports de négociation de paix, et dans un certain sens, ça a marché. Même si la paix n'est pas totalement revenue, on a quand même utilisé ces régulations sociales que nous donne le PCI. Et pour finir, j'invoque également la question de la nature. Vous savez que l'Africain est lié à la nature par des relations absolument de croyances, de pratiques, de rites. Et pour sauvegarder cette nature, on utilise beaucoup plus le PCI et les valeurs consenties dans le PCI pour protéger la nature et le milieu naturel. Donc, la protection du PCI est chez nous extrêmement importante et nous saluons un peu ce travail qui a été déjà engagé par le secrétariat et nous encourageons à continuer dans ce sens. Je vous remercie.
Okay, merci beaucoup. As customary, after hearing from three speakers, I'd like to invite Mr. Secretary to respond. Saint Lucia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also like to join the rest of my colleagues in congratulating and appreciating the work of the Secretariat in this very, very crucial area of our lives. I come from the Caribbean, and listening to the Philippines, I mean, it's almost emotional for me because we, as most of you would know, this year was a particularly difficult year for our region with hurricanes. Virtually whole islands were destroyed and displaced, lots evacuated, etc. So we are fresh from the experience, even totally confused, even at this point. And it brings me to questions of some of the points raised by Mr. Curtis. Very, 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 very crucial points. The first is the need to be careful with generic measures. Each case is different, and that the caution should be carried out and with intense preparatory work needed for before intervention. However, there's no time in a lot of these cases. There is no time for this intense preparatory work. Some kind of intervention is urgently needed. And in fact, urgency takes on a new meaning in a lot of these areas. And I think we need some guidance in this area. Something that immediately struck me was probably our list of in need of urgent safeguarding. We may have to develop some kind of mechanism for fast-tracking the putting of some of our elements on that list for urgent safeguarding. And the awareness-building activities. It's important long before. Right now, we are scrambling in the Caribbean because a lot of our islands didn't even know of mechanisms like the emergency international assistance, and the awareness-building activities need to be very much present long before. We need to identify these areas that are under threat despite the unpredictability and lift up these awareness-building activities long before any emergency. The Caribbean will face emergency. We know that. It doesn't have to be when the emergency happens that we build the awareness-building activities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Saint Lucia. I see no more speakers from our committee members. So before turning to observer missions, I'd like to invite Secretariat to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understood we had questions from St. Lucia and Palestine. For St. Lucia, perhaps I'd like to understand, but I think for the question from Palestine, the director of the division will understand. Will answer. Can I address St. Lucia's concerns? Because indeed, and I think this is what we found, particularly in the result of natural and human-induced hazards and disasters, that the unpredictability of the timing means emphasis needs to be put in preparation and integrating. I mean, what we're finding is integrating these. There's no integrating of ICH into disaster preparedness plans, but also in the inventories. So one of the things that came out of the desk study was the lack of, in safeguarding plans within nomination files of preparedness for disasters, but also in the inventorying systems and guidance. It might, that particular aspect should perhaps be emphasized in preparatory. And when we say rapid response, it means, once the disaster's hit, it's probably not appropriate to come in immediately and ask about ICH. You need to secure people first, but people will use ICH as they can and then understand. So but the point about including in a preparation phase and in terms of our ICH, taking recognition in things like inventory, safeguarding plans and measures and policy in terms of ICH is very valid, and I think there was references to that particularly in the desk study on natural disasters, which is online. Thank you. For the question from Palestine, I will give the floor to the director of the division. If the chair will give the floor, sorry, to the director of the division. So thank you.
Okay, Director Jyoti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you very much for this question. Just to reflect a little bit more, when we are talking about disasters, we're looking at a variety of, that's sort of a short form for many different aspects, which includes preparedness, disaster risk reduction, loss, post-disaster recovery, reconciliation, displacement, and displaced people. So there's many, many different aspects to disasters. And so one part of the answer to the question is that what we are seeing in the report and what the research has led us to believe is the methodology that we are using, which is most effective with ICHs and community-based needs assessment, for instance, and also with the post-disaster recovery, which are methods of engaging with the communities. So this needs people to be able to work from within the communities, and that works very well for some aspects of these different aspects that I mentioned of disasters than others. Whereas the missions that have gone to Aleppo, for instance, have had other types of specific objectives for which ICH-related work may or may not be the most effective in an immediate, during an emergency situation. So just to, this is a long explanation to say that I think we need, of course, much more research to understand exactly the many ways in which we can engage, but that it is a complex process and that we need to be able to identify accurately where ICH can be most effectively engaged in the whole long process and the many different aspects, rather than to assume that it could be most effective at the moment of emergency. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Madam Director. I now give the floor to observer members. On my list, Japan, Greece, Belize, South Sudan. Please try to be as brief and to the point as possible. I give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Japan would like to introduce two research projects in relation with ICH in emerging situations. The first one, conducted by the Tokyo National Research Institute for Cultural Properties, examines the role played by ICH as a tool for resilience and recovery after the Great East Japan earthquake of March 2011. In the region devastated by the disaster, many lives were lost, and those who survived lost their homes and all their possessions. As the evacuation progressed, some people moved out of the communities and some remained. But during the time of the festivals, they were able to gather as a whole again. Evidently, ICH served as a spiritual pillar for these people in disaster-stricken communities and also became the driving force behind their recovery efforts. Through this research, we learned that we also have to protect ICH from disasters by preparing customized measures adapted to the specificities of the different forms of intangible cultural heritage, such as oral traditions, traditional arts, or crafts. In addition, we recognize the importance of creating inventories. The results of this research are compiled in a leaflet, which is available in front of the coffee table, just outside this room. The second research project that Japan would like to introduce is now being conducted by IRCI, a Category 2 center in Japan. IRCI has been engaged in two research projects, one on the theme of ICH safeguarding and natural disaster risk management, and one on post-conflict situations, focusing on the Asia-Pacific region. With regards to the study on emergency protection of ICH in conflict-affected countries, IRCI is planning to conduct pilot research activities in Sri Lanka and fellow other countries, and the result will be disseminated widely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan. Now, Greece.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, for giving us the floor. And since it is one of the closing discussions of this session of the committee, we would also like to congratulate you and your country, your government, for hosting this meeting and making it run so smoothly. On the subject of ICH in cases of in emergencies in general, we were impressed by the report of the Secretariat, and we would like to congratulate them for further elaborating and giving an actual roadmap for the enhancement of the value of ICH in cases of armed conflict and in averting natural disasters and risk management. On our part in Greece, I would like to inform the body that we have been engaged with the High Commission, the UN High Commission for the Refugees, and we are trying now to formulate a program with them for dealing with the refugees in Greece, although it has to be noted that it is a very difficult exercise for lots of reasons, and some of them were mentioned by the distinguished delegate of Lebanon and the Secretary, but for one more reason, that in Greece the refugees do not stay for long. Anyway, the UN, the representatives of the High Commission of UN in Greece do believe that there is a lot of potential in exploring this and in making the refugees that are even temporarily in camps, this issue can enable them to build some sort of cohesiveness again, to bring some sort of cohesiveness again into their lives. On the other subject, I would beg your tolerance for a few seconds. On the other issue of making use of ICH in cases of averting or preventing natural disasters, I'm glad to inform you that we are working very close with communities that practice stone masonry, dry stone masonry, and it has been proven that the continuation of this practice really saves the environment and the land from many disasters like floods or desertification of the land. And thank you very much for giving us the time, and congratulations for your work. And I'm sure next time we will have a lot more to discuss on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Greece. Now, distinguished delegate of Belize.
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And let me also use the opportunity to congratulate you and the people and government of South Korea for the excellent hosting of this intergovernmental meeting. With respect to the report by the Secretariat, we'd like to congratulate the Secretariat for the development of this report. And in particular, we commend the approach that is proposed, the community-based needs identification approach. While I support the view that the mechanism for international assistance in instances of emergency is not to be deployed strictly as a rapid response mechanism, but rather to be deployed only after an adequate needs-based assessment has been conducted and a plan has been developed in support of communities. There are two things that come to mind, and one is that this is perhaps an opportunity for an integrated approach among UN agencies and conventions in times of disaster, and two, it is also that perhaps in the long run there will arise a need to discuss how to deal with some of the immediate needs that arise in the aftermath of disaster with respect to ICH. In that regard, then, I would like to request that in addition to this approach, that consideration be given to ICH that are directly connected to the livelihoods of persons affected by disaster and in the aftermath of disaster. I also note that in the spirit of the convention, where communities and practitioners are knowledge bearers, the convention is also an opportunity for the adaptation of ICH from across the world, which may help to restore livelihoods of communities affected by these disasters. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Belize. As a last speaker on this item, I'd like to invite distinguished delegate of South Sudan.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak for the first time. First, I would like to congratulate you for the wonderful coordination, administrating the meeting, and also for the report rendered by the Secretary, which has touched so many things. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, state parties representing the various member countries present here, let me, on behalf of the Republic of South Sudan, heartily appreciate the government and people of Korea for the warm reception that they have accorded to us. I would also like here to take the opportunity also to express our appreciation to UNESCO offices in Paris and in Nairobi and also in Juba, who have been giving us valuable support in this critical time which the South Sudan is facing. Ladies and gentlemen, the South Sudan is considered as one of the most diverse and culturally rich countries in the world. It has more than 64 indigenous languages being spoken by the people. And this has resulted into that we have different traditions and cultural practices taking place. The Republic of South Sudan has recognized the importance of ICH, which has made us to ratify 3 conventions of 1972, 205, and 203. And we hope that by doing that, this will give us good experience to allow us to develop the cultural structure of South Sudan. But unfortunately, the South Sudan have descended into senseless war in 2013 and 2016, and our hope now is that ICH would develop us this sector. So, last again, I would also appreciate very much again, and we thank the UNESCO office for funding us morally and technically. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. I thank you also, distinguished representative from Juba, South Sudan, for his kind words addressed to organizers. I now give the Mr. Secretary to respond to your small questions, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief, but I can sense the hearing, particularly from Belize and reflecting from St. Lucia, to assure that when we are not talking about a policy rapid response, we are not implying that you should not approach us for assistance if needed. In the context of recent activities, we are, of course, we welcome you. There are mechanisms in the convention. We ask that. We are talking, in a sense, about not defining strategic approaches without understanding the context properly in a rapid and generic way. So please do approach us on that sense. When you refer to livelihoods, indeed, that is an area for entry in what is called within the UN system, the PDNA, the Post-Disaster Needs Assessment, which seeks to identify losses and damages. And if I remember my training correctly, damages being the physical damage and losses being income or livelihoods that are lost. And in that context, things are defined within a monetary term, and identifying ICH in that aspect is indeed something we should be working towards and would address that concern. I will also, perhaps it may come up later, I do recognize the need to work with, of course we have the need to work with other UN agencies, but it is delicate. Other UN agencies are working also under difficult situations, and so when you ask us to work with another UN agency, you also need to ask the other UN agency to work with us, so that we are not just turning up there without it being clear that we are part of what is needed in the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Now let's move on to the decision. Please refer to document ITH/17/12.com/15 and its draft decision in para 26. We can see it on screens. We have a number of proposed amendments. Okay, let's adopt para by para. Para 1 is procedural 1. Seeing no objection, para 1 is adopted. Para 2 is some amendment put forward by Austria, Palestine, Cyprus. Okay. No objections, no further comments. Para 2 is adopted. Para 3 also put forward by Austria, Palestine, Cyprus. It's, I think, some kind of cosmetic change, procedural one. Seeing no objections, para 3 adopted. Para 4, including inter alia armed conflict and disasters by natural human induced hazard. I see no objections. So para 4 adopted. Para 5 in original language. Seeing no objections, para 5 adopted. Para 6 amendment put forward by Philippines, Hungary, Palestine, including by exploring linkages and cooperation with the relevant United Nations and international bodies. I see none. Para 6 adopted. Para 7, and at the end of the para, Austria, Palestine, Cyprus, and Colombia, as well as exploring and informing on further methodological approaches. I think well discussed. Seeing no objection, para 7 adopted. Para 8 and para 9 in original text language. And para 8 and 9 as a whole adopted. Para 10, para 9 also adopted. Para 10 also original formulation. Para 10 adopted. New para 11 proposed by Colombia further encourages this Secretariat to pursue cooperation with other institutions with expertise in the field of risk management in the cultural sector, such as e-commerce, Algeria.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Nous n'avons rien contre l'esprit de ce paragraphe, mais nous ne voyons pas la valeur ajoutée à préciser une ONG parmi d'autres. Donc, avec la permission de la Colombie, est-ce qu'on pourrait biffer tel que e-commerce?
Thank you, Algeria and Turkey.
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, just echo what has Algeria said to delete e-commerce. No specific reference. Thank you.
It's Colombia first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we agree. We can just delete the part of ICOMOS, our meaning is that it would be very helpful to have other institutions that are working in this field that could help countries on that subject. So it's just that it's not necessary to keep ICOMOS in the amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Colombia. It's a proposal. Colombia just withdrew the ICOMOS. So I think, Ambassador Muni, you don't need to take a floor.
Exactly. No need. Thank you.
Thank you. So, new para 11 is adopted as again amended, slightly changed. Para 11 adopted. New para 12, no, not new. Para 12 is original text language, no objection. 12 adopted. 13 also, no objection, is adopted. Can I take it that our committee members has decided to adopt draft decision? Ambassador Muni of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I waited till the end just to make a slight clarification, and I would like this to be kept in the records. You noticed that in the amendments, we talked about different situations of emergencies, including, of course, armed conflict or human-made hazards and so on. But I would like to stress that emergency situations also includes military occupation. I avoided to mention it here in order not to open a Pandora box. I know it would open an endless discussion, but I would like to have it in the records that emergency situations include military occupation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Monique. Your concern will be duly registered. So, we are seeing no objections. I therefore declare decision 12.com-15 as a whole is adopted. Two more. 16.